There's a moment in every search where the noise doesn't change. But the temperature does. This week, Cleveland didn't lose a candidate. That's the easy read. What happened was quieter than that. A decision was made elsewhere, calmly, rationally, and it revealed something Cleveland didn't say out loud. Not about scheme, not about roster talent, about risk. Because when a coach chooses a step sideways instead of a step up, it's rarely emotional. It's procedural. It's someone running the math on patience, on credibility, on how many mistakes an organization allows before the room tightens. And suddenly this search stopped feeling competitive and started feeling diagnostic. You can hear it in the way people talk now. Not frustrated, not angry, just slower. Like they're adjusting expectations without admitting it. Like they're realizing this isn't about finding the right name, but about whether the environment can still sell a future that hasn't arrived yet. No headlines changed. No announcements clarified anything, but the posture shifted, and when posture shifts during a coaching cycle, it tends to ripple outward into staff planning, into quarterback timelines, into how young talent reads the room long before anyone says the word reset. That's where Cleveland is now. Floating, not sinking, but no longer pushing through the wave. Cleveland's coaching search didn't stall because of a lack of candidates. That's the surface explanation, and it's the one most coverage will default to. There were interviews. There was interest. There were conversations that, on paper, looked productive, but
you would have thought would probably be in the running till the end, unless he found another job.
I would have thought McDaniel would have been a nice hire here, and I mentioned that yesterday. It's like I said I could wrap my head around Mike McDaniel and Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator. I think that would have given you a pretty nice combination. But McDaniel, and Dan and I were kidding yesterday, you got a second interview with the guy who wrote the "Get Me Out of Cleveland" speech for Kyle Shanahan.
Yes.
But timing tells a different story. In strong organizations, coaching searches compress. Decisions accelerate. Momentum creates its own gravity. Candidates lean in because the structure underneath them feels settled, ownership aligned, front office empowered, expectations clear enough to measure against. Cleveland's process hasn't done that. Instead, it's stretched. Not dramatically. Just enough to introduce friction. And friction in leadership cycles is rarely neutral. It forces candidates to ask quieter questions, not about playbooks, but about patience. Because patience is the first currency a head coach spends. Every coach entering a new role knows the opening season isn't about wins alone. It's about permission. Permission to install language. Permission to disappoint early. Permission to take short-term losses without eroding long-term trust. When a search lingers, it subtly reframes that equation. It suggests that certainty is still being negotiated internally, and if it is, the margin for error shrinks before the first meeting ever happens. That's why the decisions made around Cleveland this week mattered more than the decisions Cleveland made itself. Elsewhere, roles were clarified quickly. Staff structures were outlined early. Authority lines were drawn without ceremony. Those aren't flashy developments, but they are signals, especially to experienced coaches who have already lived through one misaligned situation and don't intend to repeat it. This isn't Cleveland being rejected. It's Cleveland being compared. And comparison is the most unforgiving lens in the NFL. When two opportunities present similar upside but different levels of institutional calm, the choice often has nothing to do with ambition. It has to do with survivability, how long a coach can operate before pressure starts dictating decisions rather than informing them. That's why this moment matters, not because Cleveland missed out on someone specific, but because the search has quietly entered a phase where hesitation becomes part of the narrative, even if no one uses the word. And once hesitation appears, the conversation shifts from who fits to how much time does this buy? That's a very different question. Every coaching search eventually reveals the same truth. Candidates aren't reacting to statements. They're reacting to behavior. Cleveland's leadership structure on the surface hasn't changed. Titles are intact. Lines on the org chart remain clean. But experienced coaches don't read organizations by hierarchy. They read them by how decisions survive stress, and that's where the signals begin to blur. In stable environments, authority travels in one direction. Vision is set early. Adjustments happen quietly. By the time a coach enters the building, the shape of power is already fixed. That clarity creates confidence, not because it guarantees success, But because it defines accountability, Cleveland's pattern has been different over multiple cycles. Moments of pressure have produced recalibration rather than reinforcement. Expectations shift midstream. Timelines compress unexpectedly. And while none of this appears chaotic in isolation, together it creates a leadership texture that feels reactive rather than anticipatory, that matters more than scheme. Head coach doesn't just install systems, he inherits pressure. And pressure always asks the same question: who absorbs the first hit? Ownership, the front office, or the staff. In Cleveland, that answer hasn't consistently felt predictable, which is why trust becomes the silent variable in this search. Trust isn't built by promises. It's built by pattern recognition. Coaches study how long previous staffs were supported when results stalled. They track how messaging changed publicly versus privately. They notice when accountability flowed downward instead of upward, and they adjust their risk tolerance accordingly. This is where Cleveland's search begins to narrow, not because candidates disappear, but because the profile of candidates shifts. The safest choice becomes someone willing to trade long-term control for short-term opportunity, someone earlier in their arc, someone more adaptable to moving goalposts. That's not inherently bad, but it's consequential because leadership alignment doesn't just affect the head coach. It cascades into staff hiring, into how coordinators commit, into whether assistants see the role as a destination or a bridge, and players feel that too. Veterans recognize when an organization is still negotiating its identity. Young players learn quickly whose voice carries final weight. Over time, that awareness shapes locker room behavior long before it shows up on film. So when this coaching search feels quieter than expected, it's not because nothing is happening. It's because the most important evaluations aren't happening publicly. They're happening in rooms where leverage is measured, not discussed, where confidence is inferred, not announced, and where every signal, intentional or not, is logged. By the time Cleveland makes its choice, the decision will look decisive, but the conditions surrounding it will already be set, and those conditions tend to matter longer than the hire itself. By the time a head coach is hired, most people assume the future opens up. New vision, clean slate, reset language. In reality, the opposite usually happens. The future narrows first because every coaching search quietly locks in constraints on the quarterback timeline, on staff composition, on how aggressive an organization can afford to be without destabilizing itself again. Cleveland is in that narrowing phase. Now, whoever takes this job won't be inheriting an open runway. They'll be inheriting a roster with defined peaks, a quarterback situation that demands alignment rather than experimentation, and a patience window that has already been partially spent by the time the introduction happens, that changes how decisions get made. Instead of asking, what do we want to become? The questions turn more immediate. How quickly can this stabilize? Which risks are acceptable right now? Where can flexibility still be preserved? Those aren't visionary questions. They're containment questions, and containment shapes behavior. Coach entering under those conditions is more likely to prioritize familiarity over innovation. Staff hires tilt toward trust and speed rather than long-term upside. Systems are chosen not for maximum ceiling, but for how fast they reduce volatility. Again, not wrong, but defining. This is where the quarterback factor becomes unavoidable. Quarterbacks don't just need coaching. They need time alignment. The organization, the staff, and the locker room have to be moving at the same tempo. When those timelines misalign, development stalls, not because of talent, but because every decision carries conflicting incentives. Cleveland's next coach will feel that tension immediately. Push too hard for evolution, and the environment resists. Move too cautiously, and the window quietly closes. That balance is hard even in ideal situations. It becomes far harder when the margin for early error is thin. This is why experienced coaches calculate risk differently at this stage of their careers. They're not afraid of rebuilding. They're wary of compressed accountability situations, where long-term plans are evaluated through short-term lenses. That's the future Cleveland is shaping right now. Whether intentionally or not a collapse, not a reset. A tightening, and tightening environments reward precision but punish hesitation. They require alignment immediately, because there's less room to course correct later. So when this coaching search concludes, the real impact won't be visible on day one. It will show up in how aggressive the staff feels, comfortable being how quickly young players are, trusted how the quarterback path is framed internally, and how the organization responds the first time momentum stalls. Those moments will tell us whether this search merely filled a role or quietly defined the limits of what comes next. The limits of what comes next. Coaching searches always end the same way, with a name, a podium, and a sense of relief that something has been decided, but relief isn't. Resolution. What actually matters begins after the announcements stop and the environment settles into whatever shape it's been forming quietly all along. That's when patterns either stabilize or reassert themselves. Cleveland isn't at a crossroads right now. It's past it. The direction has already been influenced by the way this process unfolded, by what felt clear, what felt delayed, and how much certainty was available before certainty was officially required. None of this guarantees failure. None of it guarantees success, but it does define the margins from here on. Progress won't come from bold statements or symbolic hires. It'll come from consistency in messaging, in patience, and in how the first signs of friction are handled internally rather than publicly. Those moments won't trend. They won't break news, but they'll tell us everything. And over time, the teams that get this part right don't need explaining. Their decisions start to make sense before the results arrive. That's the space Cleveland is moving into now, quietly.